A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hello, Herman and Corin. One of the things that you might know about me is that I try to minimize my use of paper. This is something I've done for many years. And it really does come from an environmental standpoint. I feel like if it can be avoided through not using paper, then there's really no need to use paper in the first place. We talked in previous episodes about digital ebook readers and how one can, if you do want to print or you feel like you need to print things because you're going to go crazy otherwise on. We talked in the context of people keeping the Shabbat that don't use electricity. How we could minimize or make our printing as least environmentally destructive as possible. And the unfortunate answer was that it's actually very hard to do that and very expensive to print on paper that is truly regenerative and ink that minimizes, that's as least destructive as possible or using up finite resources. So you actually pay a heavy premium and it's incredibly difficult to do this, which is really frustrating. It's like everything in the market argues against making a sustainable choice. But putting that on the shelf for the moment, one of the other areas in which my use of paper occasionally hits points of friction is when I want to just grab a notebook and write something down. I just had a couple of ideas for episodes that I really wanted to throw into the pipeline, and I wanted to grab a piece of paper. And I was thinking, I should actually ask Herman and Corin, what would you recommend as a good pen? Because I'd love to have one that isn't. I'm forever losing these dollar store pens. And I'd love to just have one decent pen that's refillable. But then I thought, well, it wouldn't be better just to not have paper at all. So we talked about whiteboards before, Herman and Corin, and I've adopted the whiteboard way. I have a couple of decent whiteboards in our house now. And whiteboards are one of those products that it's like the illusion, we talk about sustainability, of dollar store goods that I reckon are just so bad for the planet. They sell you something that is really looks like the real thing but doesn't work as well as the real thing, and you're going to just throw it out in frustration in a year. And that's exactly the difference between a $1 whiteboard and a $30 whiteboard or a $50 or $100 whiteboard. They're actually a good whiteboard is not just something that you think startup founders talk about to get unnecessary things for their office. They erase much nicer and they're just good quality. They're sturdy, and there's a lot to be said for that. So Herman and Corin, to cut to the chase here, what I would love to have is something like a whiteboard notebook, and I've seen these that are actually decent. Now, I know that there are some ones for digitizing what you write in it, and I don't think I even want or need something that sophisticated. My plan of action would be something I could jot down 1 or 2 or 3 pages of notes, and I would probably just take photographs on my phone and then save it to Google Photos. Google Photos is kind of my makeshift organization system. I use it all the time to just upload photos of whiteboards. And it's actually, in the era of AI, become quite viable because you can just send that into ChatGPT and I can say, hey, here's a whiteboard. I planned out my to-do list for today. Can you just convert that to text, please? And it works very well. It's a great AI workflow, in fact. So Herman and Corin, within the realm of better quality products, do you happen to know of any whiteboard notebooks, that can hold a few pages at a time? They're good quality. They're not gonna, hold on to ink. They rub away clean. They have a specific whiteboard marker that they work with. It's a decent quality ecosystem, as it were. What would be your product recommendations? Over to you two.
I was looking at my desk this morning and I realized I have essentially created a physical manifestation of my own cognitive debt. There are stacks of paper everywhere, mostly half-finished diagrams and bullet points that I'm never going to look at again because the friction of scanning them is just too high. It is a mess, Herman. I feel like I am drowning in my own ideas, but because they are trapped on dead wood, they might as well not exist.
The classic analog graveyard. It is a common problem when you are trying to bridge the gap between quick spatial thinking and a digital knowledge base. You want the speed of the pen, but the permanence and searchability of the cloud. Most people try to solve this with those scanning apps on their phones, but let's be honest, those apps are designed for single receipts or flat documents. When you are dealing with high-volume brainstorming, 20 or 30 pages of interconnected diagrams, the workflow completely falls apart. You spend more time fighting the camera angle and the lighting than you do actually thinking.
Precisely why today's prompt from Daniel is so timely. He is looking for recommendations for high-quality whiteboard notebooks. He has 3 very specific criteria: high page capacity, the ability to erase perfectly clean every time, and a robust ecosystem of markers. He wants a durable, reusable bridge to get his handwritten notes into an artificial intelligence workflow for transcription. He is essentially looking for a hardware solution to an input problem.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, Daniel is hitting on a massive shift we are seeing right now in the productivity space. We are actually at a bit of a crossroads this month, specifically here in late March of 2026. The giant of this category, Rocketbook, is officially winding down operations after that announcement back in December. If you are looking for a long-term, durable solution, the old standby is basically off the table. Their cloud services are sunsetting, and the community is scrambling for alternatives that do not rely on a proprietary app.
It is the end of an era for the synthetic paper crowd, but honestly, I always found the Rocketbook experience a bit smudgy. It never felt like a real whiteboard. It felt like writing on a very fancy plastic bag. If Daniel wants a real whiteboard feel that plays nice with vision models, we have to look at actual whiteboard notebooks, not just reusable paper. We need to talk about the material science of the surface itself, because that is where the artificial intelligence ingestion either succeeds or fails.
There is a significant technical distinction there. Most people think a whiteboard is just any shiny surface, but the material science dictates whether you are going to be fighting ghosting for the next 3 years. You have 3 main players: melamine, which is the cheap stuff you find in bargain bins, painted steel or aluminum, and then the high-end polymers like polyethylene terephthalate, or PET.
I'm assuming the PET is where we want to live, if we care about the clean erase requirement Daniel mentioned.
PET is the gold standard for portable surfaces. It is non-porous and chemically resistant. Melamine is actually quite porous at a microscopic level. If you looked at a melamine board under an electron microscope, it would look like a mountain range with deep valleys. Every time you write on a cheap melamine board, tiny amounts of pigment get trapped in those valleys. That is what causes ghosting. After 50 or 60 cycles, your whiteboard is suddenly a light gray board, and that is a nightmare for artificial intelligence vision models because the signal-to-noise ratio just plummets.
Right. Because if I am taking a photo for a model like GPT-4o or the latest Claude 3.5 Sonnet, I need that high contrast. If the background is cluttered with the ghostly remnants of last Tuesday's grocery list, the optical character recognition is going to hallucinate commas and periods everywhere. It is like trying to read a book where someone has scribbled over every sentence with a light gray crayon.
It is actually worse than that. Modern vision language models are very sensitive to what we call specular highlights and surface noise. When a surface ghosts, it changes the way light reflects off the page. We have seen data suggesting that character recognition accuracy can drop by 15 to 20% if the board has significant ghosting or if the surface reflectivity is inconsistent. As of March 2026, the best models still struggle with noise that humans can easily ignore. If the model thinks a smudge is a character, the entire transcription of your technical diagram is ruined.
So if Daniel wants high capacity, where does he go? Most of these notebooks I see are just 2 or 3 boards bound together, which is fine for a quick sketch, but useless for a deep dive architecture session.
That is the big hurdle. If you want volume, you have to look at something like the Magic Whiteboard notebook. They have an A5 version that packs 40 pages or 20 double-sided leaves. They use a proprietary gloss-coated paper that is incredibly smooth. It is not quite as thick as a rigid board, but it gives you that volume. The trade-off is that because it is a coated paper rather than a solid PET sheet, it has a lower cycle life.
40 pages is a lot of real estate for a whiteboard. You could map out an entire software architecture in one sitting without having to stop and erase. But does it hold up? I am always skeptical of anything called magic. What is the actual durability like?
The durability on the Magic Whiteboard is decent for a few hundred cycles. But if Daniel is looking for something he can pass down to his grandkids, he might want the Whitebook Pro. It is an Ottawa-based company that uses a patented UV hypergloss film. It only has 20 pages, so half the capacity of the Magic version, but the surface is much more robust. It is designed specifically to prevent smudging while the book is closed, which is the other half of the capacity problem. If you have 20 pages of notes and you close the book, you do not want page 7 to end up imprinted on the back of page 6.
That is the digital sandwich problem we talked about in episode 868. But for ink, it is a physical sandwich. You have all this data pressed together under pressure in your backpack. If the ink is not stable, your notes are basically a Rorschach test by the time you get home. This is why the marker ecosystem Daniel mentioned is so critical. You can't just use any old marker.
This is where most people fail. They buy a great notebook and then use the cheapest, fattest markers they can find. If you are doing artificial intelligence ingestion, you need a fine tip. The industry standard right now is the Staedtler Lumocolor 305 F9. It is a fine tip correctable marker.
Correctable? That sounds like marketing speak for it does not erase.
It is actually brilliant. The ink dries in about 3 seconds and becomes smudge-proof. You can rub your hand over it and nothing happens. But the moment you use a damp cloth or the felt eraser on the end of the pen, it lifts right off. It solves the closed book problem entirely. You can fill up all 20 pages of a Whitebook Pro, toss it in your bag, and the notes stay pristine until you are ready to scan them. Most standard dry erase markers use a non-polar solvent that never truly sets, which is why they smudge if you even look at them funny.
I imagine the fine tip is also crucial for the vision models. If I am using a standard 1.5mm Expo marker, my E looks like an O and my A looks like a blob.
The line weight is everything. A 0.6mm tip provides the kind of definition that makes a vision language model's job easy. When you have a clean, high-contrast black line on a pure white PET surface, current models are hitting 95% accuracy on handwriting. If you use a thick marker on a ghosted melamine surface, that drops to the low 70s. You are essentially making the AI work 10 times harder just to see the lines.
I have been playing around with the new PixSnow update from last month, and it is surprisingly good at handling complex layouts. I noticed that if I use a consistent marker weight, it can actually distinguish between my headers and my body text based on the pressure I apply. It is like the model is learning my personal typography, but I still run into that glare problem.
PixSnow is doing some interesting pre-processing. They are essentially running a filter to remove specular highlights before the image even hits the model. One of the biggest issues with whiteboard notebooks is the glare. Because the surfaces are so glossy, you often get a big white blob in the middle of your photo where the overhead light was reflecting. That glare is a total information blackout for an AI model.
I actually wrote a little Python script for this. It uses a basic edge detection algorithm to identify the page boundaries and then adjusts the local contrast to blow out the glare. It uses the OpenCV library to find the four corners of the notebook, performs a perspective transform to flatten it, and then applies a bilateral filter to smooth out the surface while keeping the ink edges sharp. It is not perfect, but it makes a huge difference for the OCR.
That is the level of friction we are trying to eliminate. If Daniel wants a truly seamless workflow, he should look at the new board Memo. It is a Japanese design that is a bit of a cult favorite. It only has 8 writable surfaces, but it has these clear PET protective sheets between every page.
Wait, like the old school overhead projector transparencies?
Exactly like that. You can write on the board, then flip the clear sheet over it. You can then write on the clear sheet to annotate the board without actually changing the original notes. It is like having layers in Photoshop, but in a physical notebook.
Herman, you are nerding out so hard right now. You just described physical layers as a feature. I love it. But honestly, that sounds incredibly useful for an AI workflow. You could have your base diagram on the board and your to-do list on the transparent layer. When you take the photo, the AI sees both, but you can also flip the transparency up to just get the clean diagram. It gives you a multimodal input from a single physical page.
It is a level of modularity that you just do not get with paper, and because it is Japanese engineered, the PET quality is incredible. I have seen new boards that have been in daily use for 3 years with zero ghosting. That is the durability Daniel is looking for. We call it the 500 cycle threshold. Most consumer boards fail at 100. A professional grade PET surface can handle 500 to 1,000 erasures before you see any degradation in the surface tension. If you pair that with a refillable marker system like OSPen, you are basically out of the disposable economy entirely.
OSPen? I haven't heard of them. Are they the ones with the aluminum barrels?
They are. They are a bit of an investment up front, but you buy a single bottle of ink and it replaces about 60 disposable markers. For someone like Daniel, who is clearly doing a lot of high volume writing, it is the only way to go. Plus, the ink is low odor and high pigment, which helps with that contrast we were talking about. It is a much more sustainable way to feed the AI beast.
I think there is a deeper psychological point here, too. We talked about this back in episode 1155, the paperless paradox. There is something about the physical act of erasing that acts as a mental reset. When I'm on a digital tablet, I just hit undo, and it is gone instantly. But when I physically wipe a whiteboard clean, it is like I am clearing space in my brain for the next idea. It is a deliberate cognitive strategy.
There's actually some research on that. The tactile feedback of writing on a slightly resistant surface, like a high-gloss PET film, leads to better spatial memory encoding than writing on a glass screen. You remember where the idea was located on the page because you felt the friction of creating it. E-ink tablets like the Remarkable or the books try to mimic this, but they still lack the infinite contrast of real ink on a white surface. For AI vision models, that real-world contrast is still superior to the gray-on-gray of most e-ink displays.
So the whiteboard notebook is basically a cognitive information radiator you can carry in your pocket. It is the portable version of the DIY dashboards we discussed in episode 649. You can have your high-level goals or your architecture map visible at all times. Then upload it to the AI when you are done. It is a forcing function for organization.
And the integration is getting so much better. With the launch of the IFL-YTEKAI Note 2 earlier this month at MWC, we are seeing the electronic side of this catch-up. But for Daniel's specific use case minimizing paper and maximizing durability, the physical PET notebook is still the winner. It never runs out of battery. It doesn't have a proprietary app that might get discontinued like Rocketbooks just did. It is just a surface and some ink. It is future-proof because it relies on physics, not firmware.
It is the ultimate buy-it-for-life tool, which we touched on in episode 827. If you get the right surface and the right markers, you are done. No more buying notebooks every 6 months. But let's talk about the workflow. How do we actually get from the physical page to a structured markdown file in Obsidian?
I want to go back to the AI transcription part for a second because that is where the real value is for a tech-literate person like Daniel. If he is using something like GPT-4o, he can do more than just transcribe. He can say, look at this whiteboard diagram of my automation workflow and write the YAML configuration for it.
I have done that. It is eerie how well it works. I drew a messy flowchart for a Home Assistant routine, took a photo of my whitebook, and the model spat out the code with about 90% accuracy. I just had to fix a few entity names. But that only worked because I used a fine tip marker. If I had used a fat expo, the AI would have seen a bunch of black rectangles.
That is the power of the hybrid loop. You use the analog surface for the messy, non-linear thinking that humans are good at, and then you use the AI to do the structured, boring work of turning that into data. But that loop only works if the analog to digital bridge is high fidelity. If the photo is blurry or the surface is ghosted, the AI spends all its intelligence, just trying to figure out what the letters are, rather than what the ideas mean. You are wasting tokens on basic vision tasks instead of high-level reasoning.
It is like trying to have a deep conversation with someone while they are shouting over a loud lawnmower. You can do it, but it is exhausting and you are going to miss the nuances. The lawnmower is the ghosting on your notebook.
Well, not exactly, but you've hit the nail on the head. The surface is the signal. If you want a recommendation for Daniel, I would say the Whitebook Pro if he wants the best durability and smudge resistance, or the Magic Whiteboard Notebook if he truly needs that 40-page capacity. The Whitebook Pro is essentially the professional choice for someone who travels, while the Magic Whiteboard is better for someone who stays at their desk and needs to map out massive multi-page projects.
And don't forget the markers. If he uses a standard fat tip marker, he is sabotaging himself. Get the Staedtler Lumacolor fine tips. They are a game changer. I actually keep a 3-pack in my bag at all times now. They are the only markers that don't make me feel like I am writing with a crayon.
And if he is feeling particularly industrious, he could even look into the Green Story Green Book. It is a modular system with a click ring binding. You can actually swap pages in and out. So if he has a page of notes he wants to keep visible while he works on a new page, he could just rearrange the book. It is the most flexible of the high-end options.
I love a good modular system. It appeals to that part of my brain that wants to organize everything into perfect little buckets. Though, being a sloth, my buckets usually just end up being one giant pile that I eventually get around to sorting. But at least with a whiteboard, the pile is erasable.
The beauty of the whiteboard notebook is that you cannot let the pile get too big. Eventually, you run out of pages and you are forced to either digitize or delete. It creates a natural cadence for your workflow. It is a forcing function for organization. You can't just keep adding pages like you can in a digital app. You have to curate your thoughts in real time.
It is the opposite of the digital hoarding we do with apps like Notion or Obsidian, where we just clip thousands of articles we will never read. With a physical notebook that has a finite capacity, you have to decide, is this idea worth the space it is taking up? If it isn't, you wipe it away. That act of deletion is just as important as the act of creation.
That intentionality is the secret sauce of the whole system. You are not just recording information, you are filtering it. And when you finally do take that photo for the AI, you are sending it a curated, high-quality signal.
So, to recap for Daniel, PET surfaces for the win, fine-tip correctable markers for the AI, and maybe a little Python script on the side to handle the glare. It sounds like a solid setup. It is a professional-grade workflow that respects both the human brain and the machine's vision.
It is one of the few areas where the low-tech solution is actually more future-proof than the high-tech one. We are seeing a lot of smart whiteboards that cost thousands of dollars and require a subscription, but a $20 notebook and a $5 marker can achieve 90% of the same result if you know how to use the AI tools we have today.
Until we get those smart glasses that can just see our thoughts and transcribe them in real time. But knowing my thoughts, that might be a terrifying prospect. The AI would just be transcribing. I wonder if there is any more coffee every 5 minutes. I think I prefer the whiteboard. It gives me a layer of privacy between my brain and the cloud.
We are at least a few years away from the coffee thought API. For now, the whiteboard is our best bet.
Well, I think we've given Daniel plenty to chew on. I am actually feeling inspired to go clear off my desk now. Or at least move the pile of paper to a different corner so I can fit a new whiteboard notebook. I think I'm going to try the new board Memo with those transparency layers.
Progress is progress, Corn, even if it is just moving the clutter around to make room for a better system.
I prefer to call it dynamic spatial reorganization. It sounds much more professional.
Of course it does.
All right. Let's wrap this up with some practical takeaways for anyone else looking to build this kind of bridge. First, prioritize the surface material. If the description doesn't mention PET or a specific high-gloss film, proceed with caution. Melamine is for kids' playrooms, not for professional AI workflows. Look for that 500 cycle durability rating.
Second, invest in the marker ecosystem. The Staedtler Lumacolor correctables are the gold standard for a reason. They give you the smudge resistance you need for a portable notebook without sacrificing the clean erase. And if you are doing a lot of volume, look into the OSPen refillable system. It is better for the planet and better for your wallet in the long run.
And third, think about your lighting. When you are taking that photo for the AI, try to avoid direct overhead lights that create those specular highlights. Natural side lighting is usually the best for maximizing contrast and minimizing glare. If you can get the image quality up, the AI will do the rest. It is all about the physics of the input. If the input is clean, the output is magic.
And if the input is my handwriting, the output is a miracle.
Fair point. Well, this has been a great deep dive. I hope this helps Daniel find the perfect setup for his workflow in Jerusalem. It is always fun to see how these small hardware choices can have such a big impact on how we actually get work done.
It is the physical layer of the stack. We spend so much time talking about software, but the stuff we touch and write on matters just as much.
Before we go, we should probably mention the people who keep the lights on and the GPS humming.
Big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. They are the engine under the hood that makes My Weird Prompts possible.
And thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for making sure we don't sound like we are recording this from inside a cardboard box.
If you found this helpful, or if you had your own analog to digital secrets, we would love to hear them. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and all the links to subscribe.
We are also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so if you haven't followed us there yet, that is a great way to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling generous, a quick review on your app of choice really helps new listeners find the show.
We appreciate the support. It keeps us curious, and it keeps the prompts coming.
Speaking of prompts, keep them coming, Daniel. This was a fun one. I am off to go find some PET film and a 0.6mm marker.
I'll race you to the office supply store.
You're a donkey, Herman. You'll definitely win. I'm a sloth. I'll get there by next Tuesday.
I'll save you a spot in the checkout line.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We will see you in the next one.
Goodbye, everyone.
See ya.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where other